Steam curled above the diner's counter, mixing with the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. Then a sharp crack split the morning in half. Tyler Briggs's hand smashed across Henry Coleman's face. The 72-year-old veteran staggered, coffee spilling, quarters scattering across the linoleum. The room froze. Forks stopped. Every phone camera rose. Tyler sneered, his voice dripping contempt. "Know your place, old man." Henry's fingers brushed the burning mark on his cheek. The tiny American flag pin on his cardigan caught the fluorescent light. A flash of history, of service, of something far stronger than frail bones. Hidden beneath that worn Navy sweater was a Purple Heart, and inside his phone, one contact that could end a man's career with a single call. Ethan Coleman, Director of Homeland Security. To everyone watching, it looked like a bully humiliating a defenseless senior. They were wrong. They had just witnessed a man slap the father of one of the most powerful figures in America. And before this morning was over, every camera in that diner would capture what real power looks like. Morning light spilled through the wide glass windows of Murphy's Diner, painting long golden stripes across cracked linoleum floors. The smell of bacon and brewed coffee wrapped the air like a warm blanket, mixed with the faint hiss of the grill and the lazy hum of the jukebox that hadn't changed its playlist since the 80s. It was Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that felt the same as 100 others before it in the small town of Millbrook, population 3,847, where routine was comfort and strangers were rare. Farmers in faded flannel shirts filled the corner booths, trading talk about crop prices and rain forecasts. Retired couples lingered over pancakes, nurses grabbed breakfast before their shifts, and the old ceiling fan circled slowly, keeping time with the calm heartbeat of the town. At exactly 7:30, the diner's front door creaked open, and Henry Coleman stepped in like clockwork. 72 years old, skin weathered by service and sunlight, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had once lived by orders. His cardigan was pressed, his shoes shined, and his American flag pin sat perfectly aligned on the collar, always in the same spot, like a ritual of dignity. He greeted Rosa Delgado behind the counter with a soft nod. She had already started pouring his black coffee before he reached his usual booth by the window. "Mornin', Mr. Coleman," Rosa said, brushing a loose strand of dark hair from her cheek. "The usual. Thank you, Rosa." "You always remember," he replied, voice steady, calm, the tone of a man who didn't need much to feel content. He sat down, back to the wall as always, facing the entrance, an old habit from a lifetime of vigilance. He unfolded his napkin with soldierly precision, laid out his toast, checked his watch, and began counting exact change from a worn leather wallet. To anyone else, he looked like just another old man keeping busy in his loneliness. But Rosa had worked there long enough to notice the little things. The way his eyes tracked every movement in the diner without seeming to. The way his hands never shook, even when he lifted the coffee cup. The subtle military order in everything he did. Outside, a light breeze stirred the American flag hanging from the pole near the parking lot. A college student named Luke Bennett adjusted his camera saw on the sidewalk, filming for a journalism class project called Real America Mornings. He'd picked Murphy's Diner because it looked authentic, timeless. Neon lights buzzing, waitresses in aprons, a handwritten menu board that hadn't changed in a decade. He had no idea his footage would soon go viral and reach the highest levels of government. At another booth near the back sat Tyler Briggs, heavy-set, mid-30s, construction worker uniform still clean this early in the day, boots tapping impatiently against the floor. His breakfast plate sat half-eaten, eggs congealing, untouched coffee cooling beside him. He scrolled through his phone, thumb twitching, jaw tight. Tyler was known around town, not because he was successful, but because he was loud. A man who thought volume proved strength. He'd been nursing resentment ever since the new housing projects brought what he called outsiders into Millbrook. College kids, immigrants, retirees from the city. He missed the old days when everyone looked like him, talked like him, thought like him. He looked up when Henry Coleman walked in. His eyes followed the old man's slow, deliberate movements, the careful counting of coins, the polite nods, the quiet confidence that radiated from a man who didn't need anyone's approval. That confidence bothered Tyler in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't that Henry did anything wrong, it was that he existed, peaceful, dignified, unbothered. Something about that presence stirred all the wrong things inside Tyler. "Don't know why they let just anyone in here these days," he muttered, loud enough for 2 tables to hear. His coworker glanced up, uncomfortable, but said nothing. Nobody ever said anything. Rosa froze mid-step, pretending not to hear. Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, turned a page of her newspaper with a tight jaw. The sound of a fork clinking on a plate filled the silence no one wanted to break. Tyler smirked, enjoying the quiet discomfort. He'd been pushing that line for weeks now, small comments, little tests, to see how far he could go before someone called him out. No one ever did. They never do, he thought, because deep down, they all agree with me. Outside, Luke changed angles, framing his lens on the window where sunlight spilled across Henry's booth. Inside, Rosa refilled cups, glancing nervously between the 2 men. Henry didn't react to Tyler's voice. He'd lived long enough to know what battles were worth fighting. His phone buzzed with a message. Ethan Coleman, his son. "Big day today, Dad. Cabinet meeting in an hour. Wish me luck." Henry smiled faintly, tapping back a reply. "Always proud of you, son. Be safe." He tucked the phone away, sipped his coffee, and looked out the window, eyes distant. He remembered teaching his son to stand tall no matter what, to never let anger dictate dignity. He'd learned that lesson on foreign soil decades ago, and it had kept him alive when men around him hadn't been so lucky. Tyler's companion left for work, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his bitterness. The diner began to thin out. Farmers left for their fields, nurses for their shifts. The chatter quieted until only a few regulars remained. Rosa checked her phone, a message from her cousin Luke. "Getting great footage of small-town life. Looks perfect here." She smiled faintly and waved through the window. Luke waved back, adjusting his camera. Neither of them knew they were about to record a piece of history. Tyler pushed back his chair, its metal legs screeching. He drained his cold coffee in one gulp and stood up. Every step toward Henry's booth sounded deliberate, echoing through the diner like warning bells. Rosa froze. Mrs. Patterson lowered her newspaper. Even Chief Ben Alvarez, who'd stopped in for a to-go order, tensed in his seat. Henry looked up as the shadow of Tyler Briggs fell across his table. "Mornin'," Henry said, polite as always. Tyler's voice cut through the stillness. "You seem real comfortable here, old man. Real comfortable for someone who doesn't belong." The diner went silent. Henry straightened slightly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Just having coffee, son. Not bothering anyone." "That's where you're wrong," Tyler said, leaning closer, voice rising so everyone could hear. "Your being here bothers me. Bothers a lot of good folks." No one spoke. Rosa's hand moved to her phone. Her pulse raced. Henry's voice stayed calm, the same steady tone he used when calming young soldiers decades ago. "I've earned the right to sit where I please, Tyler." "Earned?" Tyler snorted. "You people think respect's something you get handed." Luke's camera outside zoomed in through the window. His microphone caught every word. Henry started reaching for his wallet, ready to leave quietly, but Tyler's hand slammed down on the table. Coins scattered across the floor, coffee spilled over his toast. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you." "Sir," Henry said softly, "I don't want trouble." "Trouble?" Tyler laughed without humor. "You're the trouble, always pretending like you belong, acting like you own this place." Rosa's voice trembled as she spoke from behind the counter. "Tyler, please stop. He hasn't done anything. You shut your mouth if you want to keep your job." Rosa froze, but her phone was already recording. Henry rose slowly, every movement deliberate, precise, the way he had once stood from a foxhole under fire. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared. There was something in that posture that made even Tyler hesitate. "I'm leaving now," Henry said. "Not till I say you can." Tyler stepped sideways, blocking his path. The room was frozen in collective disbelief. Even Chief Alvarez hesitated, trying to decide if stepping in would make things worse. Henry sighed softly. "Move, son. Make me, old man." Henry's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. "You're making a mistake." Tyler shoved him hard. The old man stumbled backward, hip crashing against the table, coffee cups shattering on the floor. The sound sliced through the diner like a gunshot. "That's enough," Chief Alvarez said, rising. "Mind your own business unless you want some too," Tyler snapped. Rosa's phone shook in her hand, but the camera stayed steady. "Stop it, Tyler. Please stop." "Apologize," Tyler barked. "Apologize for making decent people uncomfortable." Henry's lips pressed together, blood from his bitten cheek mixing with the metallic taste of fury he'd swallowed his whole life. "I apologize if my presence upsets you," he said quietly, "but I have done nothing wrong. Wrong answer." Tyler's hand came fast, an open palm crashing into Henry's face with brutal force. The sound cracked like a whip. Henry staggered, his flag pin catching the light as he fell back a step. Gasps filled the room. Rosa cried out. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth. Luke's camera zoomed tight on the moment. Henry's hand went to his burning cheek. Blood trickled from where Tyler's ring had cut skin. For a heartbeat, he looked every bit the frail old man the bully thought he was. Then something shifted. Shoulders back, chin lifted. The calm, unshakable strength of a soldier who'd survived far worse. "You just made a serious mistake," Henry said. Tyler sneered. "Yeah, what are you going to do about it?" Grandpa Henry reached into his pocket. "Not for a weapon, for his phone. I'm going to call my son." "Your son?" Tyler barked a laugh. "What's he gonna do? Come fight your battles?" Henry scrolled his contacts. The first name read Ethan Coleman. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered. Clear, confident. "Dad? Is everything okay?" The diner went dead silent. Something in that voice carried authority, the kind that made men straighten their backs without knowing why. "I'm fine, son," Henry said calmly. "But there's been an incident. Dad, are you hurt? Where are you? I can have agents there in 20 minutes. Agents." Every person in the diner heard it. The word froze Tyler in place. His sneer faltered. "No, son, I'm not seriously hurt, but I wanted you to hear about this directly before it hits the news. Dad, what happened? Who hurt you?" Henry looked directly at Tyler, who now stood pale and motionless. "A man named Tyler Briggs just assaulted me at Murphy's Diner in Millbrook. It's all been recorded." Gasps rippled through the diner. Rosa stepped forward. "Sir, is that really your son?" Henry nodded. "Ethan Coleman. He runs Homeland Security." Chief Alvarez swore under his breath. "Jesus Christ, Tyler, do you know what you just did?" Mrs. Patterson whispered so loud it echoed. "The Ethan Coleman dad," Ethan's voice said through the speaker. "I'm sending a protective detail immediately. Legal will want witness statements." The word legal hit Tyler like ice water. He stumbled back, muttering, Wait, this is just a misunderstanding. No harm done, right, Mr. Coleman? I mean, Mr. Henry." "Sir?" Henry stared at him, calm, dignified. "The harm was done when you assumed who I was based on how I look. But I didn't know who your son was, and that makes it acceptable." Tyler's face collapsed. The truth hit him harder than any punch could. Outside, Luke nearly dropped his camera. Inside, Rosa's live stream exploded, comments flooding faster than she could read. "OMG, that's the Homeland Security guy's dad. That man's life is over." "Dad," Ethan said again, "federal investigators will be involved, not because of me. Because what happened to you is a civil rights violation." Tyler sank into a chair, sweat darkening his shirt, his pulse hammering in his ears. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "You never would have," Henry said softly. "You never would have hit me if you knew I had power. But you were fine doing it when you thought I didn't." No one spoke. Rosa's stream ticked past 10,000 viewers. Chief Alvarez took out his notepad. Mrs. Patterson started to cry. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. By the time Sheriff Linda Price arrived, the diner looked frozen in time. Spilled coffee, broken cups, phones pointed in every direction. She knew Henry Coleman. Quiet man, always paid in cash, always polite. She also knew Tyler Briggs, trouble on two legs, with the kind of family connections that usually made small problems disappear. "Mornin', Henry." Sheriff Price's tone was measured. "Heard there was an incident." Rosa stepped forward, phone still in her hand. "Sheriff, Tyler Briggs assaulted Mr. Coleman. I got everything on video." Price watched the footage. The color drained from her face as she saw the slap, heard the words, saw the blood. "Brad," she caught herself. "Tyler, I need a statement." "Henry, you wanted to press charges, I want it documented," Henry said evenly. "Whatever happens next should follow the law." Outside, news vans were already parking. Someone had leaked the footage. The hashtag Millbrook Diner was trending before noon. Rosa's following jumped from 800 to 5,000 in an hour. By the time Sheriff Price took Tyler's statement, his hands were trembling so badly he could barely sign. He kept muttering about misunderstandings, about bad mornings, about everything except the truth that everyone had seen with their own eyes. Henry sat quietly, sipping what was left of his cold coffee, his cheek swollen and red, his flag pin still gleaming. He had endured humiliation with grace, violence with restraint, and in doing so, had awakened something larger than the diner, larger than Millbrook itself. That morning, Tyler Briggs thought he was putting an old man in his place. He didn't realize he'd just triggered a movement that would change the country. And it all began with one slap that echoed far beyond the walls of Murphy's Diner. News never traveled fast in Millbrook. Until that morning. By 10 o'clock, the quiet town that prided itself on calm predictability had become a storm. Every screen in every diner, barber shop, and living room played the same shaky video from Murphy's Diner. The slap, the blood, the words that followed. It spread from Rosa Delgado's phone to Instagram, from Instagram to national morning shows, until even anchors in New York were saying the name Henry Coleman with that practiced mix of sympathy and disbelief. A 72-year-old veteran, humiliated and assaulted in public, only for the world to learn minutes later he was the father of Ethan Coleman, the sitting director of Homeland Security. At the diner, yellow police tape fluttered across the entrance. The smell of coffee still clung to the air, but the warmth was gone. Reporters gathered at the windows, pressing microphones against the glass. Rosa sat on the back steps, her apron stained with spilled coffee, phone buzzing nonstop. She'd gained 20,000 followers overnight, half calling her a hero, half calling her a liar. Every message felt heavy. The good ones made her cry. The bad ones made her tremble. Inside, Sheriff Linda Price stood at the counter, reviewing footage again on a tablet, her gut twisted. The evidence was clear. Tyler Briggs struck first, used racial slurs, threatened witnesses. But Tyler's father, Martin Briggs, owned half the construction contracts in Millbrook. He funded campaigns. He was the kind of man who made sheriffs and mayors. Price looked up at the broken booth, at the blood stain still visible on the floor tiles, and understood that for the first time in years, she was standing in a situation she couldn't bury. Henry sat quietly in the corner, a paper cup of water in his hand. 2 paramedics had checked his vitals. Bruised cheek, elevated blood pressure, but no lasting injury. The physical part, at least. His eyes were calm but distant, as if measuring something far away. Rosa approached, hesitant. "You shouldn't have come back in here," she whispered. "I served in 2 wars," he said softly. "This diner doesn't scare me." Across town, Tyler Briggs sat in the back of his father's black truck, head in his hands, phone lighting up every few seconds. His face was everywhere. Every news outlet had frozen the same frame, his hand mid-swing, Henry's cheek snapping sideways. Tyler scrolled through the comments until the screen blurred. Thousands of strangers calling him every name imaginable. Racist thug, coward, monster. He threw the phone against the seat and shouted that it was all a misunderstanding. His father didn't answer. He was on the phone with lawyers. By noon, Mayor William Crane called an emergency meeting at City Hall. His voice shook with anger, not at the assault, but at the attention. "You realize what this means," he hissed to Sheriff Price. "Tourism is dead. Our grants are dead. Do you have any idea who this man's son is?" Price's patience snapped. "I know exactly who he is, and I know what I saw." Crane lowered his voice. "Then handle it quietly. We can't have federal investigators crawling all over Millbrook. It's already too late." Outside the building, reporters shouted questions. "Has Homeland Security issued a statement? Will there be charges? Is Millbrook a racist town?" At Homeland Security headquarters in Washington, Ethan Coleman stood in front of a bank of monitors, each replaying a different angle of the diner footage. His jaw was tight, his hands folded behind his back, military straight. Around him, aides whispered updates, civil rights attorneys calling, congressional offices requesting briefings, the president's staff asking for talking points. Ethan said nothing. He watched the moment his father touched his cheek, calm even with blood on his hand. Then he turned to his chief of staff. "Get me a secure line to the state attorney general and send a federal assessment team to Millbrook. They're to coordinate with local law enforcement immediately." Back in Millbrook, Rosa sat in her car, phone on her lap. She scrolled through endless comments, her stomach churning. Messages from strangers thanking her for courage. Others calling her a liar who staged the video for attention. A few messages crossed into threats. "We know where you work. You should have kept your mouth shut." Her hands trembled as she started her engine, glancing at the rearview mirror twice before pulling out. Across town, Henry walked the short distance to his small white house on Maple Street. The flag out front hung limp in the windless afternoon. Inside, everything was neat. Photographs of Ethan in uniform lined the mantel. Medals framed on the wall glimmered in soft light. He sank into his recliner, feeling the ache spread from his hip to his spine. He had been hit harder in his life, but the humiliation stung deeper than any wound. He replayed the moment. Tyler's sneer, the laughter, the silence of the crowd. He thought about all the times he had taught young soldiers about restraint, about keeping calm when provoked. He'd done exactly that. Yet somehow the world still felt heavier. The phone rang again. Unknown number. Henry hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Coleman." "This is Agent Dana Reeves with the Department of Homeland Security. I'm part of the investigative detail your son authorized. We'll be arriving this evening. I understand this must be difficult. I've seen worse days, Agent." She paused. "We'll make sure the next ones are better." By 3 p.m., the streets near Murphy's Diner were clogged with news vans and curious locals. The hashtag Murphy's Diner had surpassed 1 million views. National commentators debated everything from small-town racism to the ethics of viral justice. Meanwhile, Sheriff Price drafted her first official statement. "Ongoing investigation. All parties cooperating. We urge the community to remain calm." It was the blandest sentence she'd ever written, but every word was a lifeline in a storm she couldn't stop. Tyler's father arrived at the sheriff's office an hour later with his attorney. Martin Briggs was a man used to control. Tall, expensive suit, voice smooth as oil. "My son made a mistake," he said, folding his hands. "He's remorseful. We'd like to make this go away quietly." Price stared at him. A 72-year-old man was assaulted in public while half the town watched. "That's not going away." Martin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything goes away for the right price, Sheriff." Her jaw tightened. "Maybe in your world, not anymore." He left furious, slamming the glass door so hard the frame shook. By early evening, the sun dipped low, washing the town in a haze of orange light. Henry stood by his window, watching cars pass. Across the street, a reporter stood in his yard until the security team from Washington arrived. 4 black SUVs, tinted windows, silent engines. The sight sent a ripple through the neighborhood. Some neighbors watched from behind curtains. Others came outside to stare. Federal presence in Millbrook was unheard of. When Agent Reeves stepped out, her posture was crisp, her voice calm. "Mr. Coleman, we'll be stationed nearby. Just precaution. You'll find I'm not a man who scares easy," he said. "I can tell." At the same time, Rosa's apartment door rattled with another kind of fear. She checked her phone again. More messages. Anonymous accounts. Go back where you came from. Fake Latina hero. She closed the blinds, sat on her couch, and cried quietly, afraid to post anything more. Luke Bennett, the student journalist, sat in his dorm room replaying his footage frame by frame. Every detail mattered now. The lighting, the sound, the timestamp. His professor had called earlier, telling him to keep all backups safe. You may have captured something that changes policy, Luke. Keep your head down. That night, the town divided itself in whispers. Bars filled with talk about outsiders stirring trouble. Churches prepared statements about forgiveness. The local radio host tried to calm things down, saying maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But the video didn't lie. At City Hall, Mayor Crane poured himself a drink and read an email from the governor's office. Federal investigators were requesting full cooperation. Crane cursed under his breath, realizing that every attempt to bury the story only made it worse. By dawn, the first federal vehicles rolled into Millbrook. Black sedans with tinted glass and government plates. They parked beside the sheriff's department. A tall woman in a navy suit stepped out. Dr. Alicia Torres, civil rights attorney, representing both the Coleman family and multiple veteran organizations. Her arrival made headlines within minutes. Rosa watched the news on her phone, the reporter's voice shaky with excitement. Civil rights lawyers have descended on Millbrook following yesterday's viral assault. The victim, Henry Coleman, is reportedly cooperating fully with investigators. Henry sat at his kitchen table, hands folded. Ethan had called again at midnight. His son's voice was calm but heavy with guilt. "Dad, I keep thinking maybe if I'd been there, you'd have done exactly what I did. Stay calm. Let the truth speak. I'm proud of you." "So am I, son." He'd barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like the past echoing back. But he refused to let bitterness take root. He'd fought too long to lose to hate now. That afternoon, Agent Reeves and Dr. Torres arrived at his door. They spread files across his table. "We'll need your statement, Mr. Coleman. Every detail, no matter how small." Henry nodded, recounting the morning from the smell of coffee to the sting of the slap. Rosa joined via video call, face pale but steady. She confirmed every second. Luke uploaded his footage to a secure server. Evidence was stacking faster than anyone expected. At the sheriff's office, Linda Price felt the walls closing in. Reporters camped outside. Her deputies complained of threats online. Old friends stopped answering her calls. She'd built her career on keeping the peace, not choosing sides. But there were no neutral corners left. That evening, the local news station aired a live interview with Henry. He wore the same cardigan, the same flag pin. The camera focused on his eyes, calm, tired, unbroken. "This isn't about who my son is," he said. "It's about how we treat each other when no one important is watching." The interviewer swallowed hard. "And what do you hope happens now, Justice?" Henry said simply. But real justice, the kind that changes things. By the time the broadcast ended, the video had been clipped, shared, remixed. Veterans groups reposted it with the caption, "Dignity Under Fire." By midnight, #Justice for Henry was trending nationwide. Tyler Briggs watched the broadcast from his living room, blinds drawn. His lawyer sat beside him, whispering strategy. "We'll claim misunderstanding, remorse, mental health issues, maybe avoid felony charges." Tyler barely heard. His world had shrunk to the sound of his own heartbeat and the faces of people staring at him online. At the diner, Rosa returned quietly with a mop and bucket. The manager had reopened under pressure. The smell of disinfectant masked the coffee. The booth where it happened sat empty. She cleaned in silence, tears mixing with sweat, whispering to herself that maybe now things would change. Outside, Luke filmed the empty diner, narrating softly into his microphone. In small towns, stories spread slow until one becomes impossible to ignore. This is what impossible looks like. 2 days after the assault, federal agents discovered something worse than the video. Hidden in county records were complaint files. 12 incidents over 18 months, all dismissed as misunderstandings. Minority families questioned at parks, veterans harassed at stores, students followed by security. Sheriff Price stared at the papers, realizing they all led back to the same names, the same people protecting the same power. When she looked up, Agent Reeves was watching her. "How many of these did you ignore?" Price hesitated. "Too many." "Then help us fix it." The investigation expanded overnight. Reporters flooded the town square. Civil rights groups arrived with banners. Some locals welcomed them. Others shouted them down. The sidewalks became a battlefield of opinion. Through it all, Henry Coleman remained composed. Each morning he raised the flag outside his house. Each evening he read letters from strangers thanking him for his strength. He answered none publicly, but kept everyone in a shoebox labeled for better days. On the third night, as rain fell against his windows, he received another call from Ethan. "Dad, we've uncovered a lot. It's bigger than we thought. There's a pattern here. Funding, property development, deliberate intimidation." Henry listened quietly. "You'll do what's right. You always have." He looked out at the streetlights shimmering in puddles and thought about the diner, about Rosa's shaken hands, Luke's camera, the silence of those who watched. He wondered if courage was contagious. Maybe it had to be. Across town, Mayor Crane was packing a briefcase, shredding documents, calling allies. The sound of sirens echoed faintly through the rain. By morning, the federal investigation would be official. The headlines would read, "Small Town Assault Sparks National Civil Rights Inquiry." But inside the quiet house on Maple Street, Henry Coleman just poured himself a cup of black coffee, folded his napkin, and sat with the same calm he'd carried his whole life. He didn't know that in less than a week Millbrook would stand before the world to decide what kind of town it truly was. And for the first time in decades, Henry felt something he hadn't known he'd missed. Hope, sharp and fragile as the sunrise creeped through his window. Dawn came without birdsong. Only the low hum of engines and the soft crackle of radio chatter drifted through Millbrook's narrow streets. Outside the sheriff's department, black sedans lined the curb like chess pieces waiting for a move. Men and women in dark suits carried folders, cameras, laptops. They spoke in clipped tones, their presence too calm for the panic they caused. Overnight, Millbrook had changed from a quiet town to the center of a federal civil rights investigation. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over tired faces. Sheriff Linda Price stood by the evidence table, a paper cup of stale coffee in her hand. She hadn't gone home. Her badge felt heavier than usual. The monitors around her showed split-screen footage, Rosa's phone video, Luke's outside angle, the diner's security feed, over and over the same motion. Tyler Briggs's hand rising, the sound, the look on Henry Coleman's face. Agent Dana Reeves moved like a conductor through the chaos, quiet but absolute. Her team filled the room with the smell of rain and suit fabric, the faint metallic tang of travel. "We start with digital," she said, voice low, precise. "Everything on servers, phones, backups. Nothing gets deleted again." Technicians unpacked drives, screens flicker into life. Federal timestamps replaced local ones, a new order overriding the old. Files long forgotten surfaced, incident reports marked resolved, citizen complaints tagged no follow-up. Dr. Alicia Torres arrived a half hour later, rain still on her coat. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes sharp behind clear lenses. "We treat this like a pattern," she said, "not an accident." She spread folders across the conference table. 12 prior incidents in 18 months. Same language, same dismissals, same departments involved. Price swallowed hard. "You think this was coordinated?" Torres didn't look up. "I think coordination is the only thing small towns do well." Out the window, locals stood in clusters, whispering. Some carried coffee cups, others carried resentment. The diner's neon sign still flickered down the block, half the bulbs dead, the rest struggling to stay lit against the morning fog. At 7:45, Agent Reeves's assistant wheeled in a portable scanner. "We've mirrored the sheriff's database," she said. "Some deletions were manual. Someone tried to wipe evidence after the assault." Price's stomach sank. "That wasn't my department." Reeves met her eyes. "Then find out whose it was." The first shock came at 8:10. An analyst called out from the back corner, "We found internal emails between city officials discussing property development and demographic concerns." She printed a few lines. Reeves read them aloud. "If we discourage certain residents from staying, property values remain stable. Need local businesses to cooperate." The words hung in the air like smoke. At that exact moment, Henry Coleman was sitting at his kitchen table, hands folded over a crossword puzzle he wasn't solving. Through his window he could see the parked federal cars, the strange gravity they brought to his quiet street. He had been awake since 4, drinking coffee that had long gone cold. The slap still echoed in his bones, but what haunted him more was the silence that followed it. The silence of decent people who watched and did nothing. His phone buzzed. Ethan again. "Dad, they've already found connections between the mayor's office and local contractors. It's bigger than we thought." Henry's voice stayed calm. "Then you'll dig until you reach daylight." Back at the station, Torres began mapping the connections on a whiteboard. Each name sprouted arrows. Business owners, city council members, donors. Mayor William Crane appeared at the center, circled in red. "Follow the money," Torres said. "It always tells the truth." At 9:15, a new batch of evidence arrived, flash drives from the county IT department. One technician, nervous and sweating, admitted he'd been ordered to clear old complaints the night before. "Ordered by whom?" Reeves asked. He hesitated, then whispered, "The mayor's office." Reeves exchanged a look with Torres. The puzzle was assembling itself. While the federal team dissected data, Millbrook's Main Street transformed into a parade of news crews. Reporters stood under umbrellas, microphones pointed at passing locals. Some townspeople smiled for cameras, eager to defend their home. Others crossed the street, unwilling to be part of a story they couldn't control. Rosa Delgado watched from her car, parked across from Murphy's. She hadn't returned to work. The diner owner had closed again, citing maintenance, though everyone knew the real reason was fear. She watched tourists snap selfies by the window where Henry had been sitting, as if tragedy had become a landmark. The sight made her sick. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "You think fame makes you safe?" She locked the screen, hands trembling, then started the car and drove toward the sheriff's office. Inside, she found Agent Reeves mid-briefing. "Ms. Delgado," Reeves said without looking up, "we were just reviewing your footage again. You caught more than you realize." Rosa's voice was small. "I wasn't trying to be famous. I just didn't want to be silent." Reeves looked up finally, something soft in her eyes. "Silence is what lets rot grow. You did the right thing." The investigation widened by the hour. By midday, agents were reviewing security footage from half the town. Grocery stores, parking lots, council chambers. Patterns emerged. Minority customers followed by staff. Police called on people who simply looked out of place. A map formed on Torres's board, each red dot another incident swept aside. Price stared at it. "How did we not see this?" Reeves replied quietly, "Because seeing would have required acting." At City Hall, Mayor Crane sat behind his mahogany desk, watching the chaos through blinds. His secretary announced the arrival of Martin Briggs. The contractor stormed in, voice low but venomous. "You said this would blow over." Crane's smile faltered. "Federal investigators are here. I can't stop that." "You'd better try," Briggs said, "because if I go down, you're coming with me." They didn't realize the office phone was on speaker, that an aide in the hallway heard every word. By evening, that aide would be sitting in the sheriff's department, signing a federal witness statement. Back at the command post, the air smelled of coffee and printer ink. Reeves stood beside the map, tracing timelines. "They used code phrases," she explained. "Community standards, heritage maintenance, neighborhood stability, all euphemisms for exclusion." Torres added, "The economic motive's clear. Depress property values in targeted areas, then buy cheap and redevelop." Rosa listened from the doorway, jaw tightening. "So all that hate was just business." Torres met her eyes. "Hate is always bad business until someone profits from it." By afternoon, the first subpoena drafts were ready. Emails, financial records, city contracts, all to be seized before sunset. Sheriff Price read the list and felt her stomach drop. Half the names were people she'd eaten dinner with. Church committee members, golf partners. Reeves noticed her expression. "You still with us, Sheriff?" Price nodded slowly. "I am now." Meanwhile, word of the investigation reached every household. Some locals cheered, others panicked. Rumors spread that the town would lose funding, that outsiders were here to ruin livelihoods. On social media, new accounts appeared overnight posting phrases like, "Defend Millbrook" and "Federal overreach must end." Reeves's cyber team traced them to the same IP address, Martin Briggs's construction office. At 5:30, rain began again, steady and cold. Inside Henry Coleman's house, the day's light faded into the soft glow of a table lamp. He sat surrounded by letters, thank you notes from veterans, emails from strangers, a single envelope with no return address. Inside was one sentence, handwritten. "Thank you for reminding us what dignity looks like." He folded it carefully and placed it with the others. A knock came at the door. Rosa stood there, soaked through, eyes red. "Agent Reeves asked me to check on you," she said, "and maybe I needed the company." Henry smiled faintly. "Then we'll both feel better." They sat at the kitchen table, the smell of rain drifting through the open window. Rosa stared at his hands, scarred, steady. Do you ever get tired of being strong? Henry looked at her. Strength isn't a choice. It's what's left when everything else runs out. At the sheriff's office, the clock struck 7. Reeves received a call from Washington. Ethan Coleman's voice came through crisp but strained. Agent Reeves, my father mentioned threats against witnesses will authorize additional protection. Reeves hesitated. We've already intercepted attempts to tamper with evidence. Whoever's behind this has resources. Then treat it as organized obstruction, Ethan said. Full authority granted. And within an hour, a new team arrived. Cybersecurity specialists led by Marcus Reed, a veteran with calm eyes and a limp that spoke louder than any introduction. He set up laptops like weapons, fingers flying over keys. They deleted files but forgot the cloud, he murmured. Amateurs? By midnight, he'd recovered logs showing coordinated meetings between Mayor Crane, Martin Briggs, and several business owners. The language was unmistakable. Phase 1 complete. 3 minority businesses closed. Property values stable. Reeves exhaled slowly. We have them. She printed copies for Torres. Price signed an affidavit. The air in the room shifted, from exhaustion to purpose. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The town slept uneasily, unaware that before sunrise, federal warrants would hit every corrupt office in Millbrook. At 1 a.m., Reeves closed her laptop, rubbing her temples. Get some rest, she told the team. Tomorrow, we start exposing them in daylight. Henry lay awake the same hour, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. He thought about how violence always started small, a word, a shove, a slap, and how justice, when it finally came, made even the quietest hearts loud. He whispered to the dark, let the truth speak loud enough for all of us. Morning arrived heavy with humidity and dread. The courthouse clock struck 7, its chime echoing through Millbrook like an announcement no one wanted to hear. News crews were already in position, their satellite vans crowding Main Street, cables snaking over wet pavement. The federal warrants had gone out before dawn. Doors had opened to men in suits and badges, and by breakfast, half the town's leadership had discovered what it meant to be on the wrong side of an investigation. Inside the sheriff's department, the air smelled of toner and rain. Boxes of seized files lined the hallway. Sheriff Linda Price moved between agents, signing chain of custody papers, watching pieces of her town being dismantled page by page. Every folder carried a familiar name, and every signature felt like erasing a friend. Yet guilt and relief moved through her in equal measure. She had chosen truth, even if it destroyed her career. Agent Dana Reeves and Dr. Alicia Torres sat across a long table covered in evidence. Stacks of emails, transaction records, minutes from city council meetings. The pattern was undeniable now. Fake bids, discriminatory loan rejections, harassment complaints that vanished in clerical smoke. Torres circled the final link with a red pen. This is enough, she said quietly. They built an economy on humiliation. By mid-morning, Henry Coleman stepped outside his house for the first time in 2 days. The neighborhood felt different, too quiet, every curtain half drawn. A convoy of black SUVs idled at the curb, agents posted discreetly nearby. He straightened the flag outside his porch, adjusting the fabric so it caught the faint wind. Rosa Delgado waited by the gate, holding 2 coffees. She offered one. For strength, she said. He took it, smiling. Downtown, the community center had been cleared for the public hearing. Folding chairs in neat rows, microphones adjusted, cameras humming softly. The smell of metal and sweat filled the air. Half the town had shown up. The other half watched from parking lots and phones. The tension felt like the moment before a thunderstorm. At noon, Agent Reeves opened the session. Her voice was calm but carried the authority of law. "We are here to present the findings of a federal investigation into civil rights violations committed within Millbrook's government and business network." Papers rustled, cameras clicked. Reeves listed names: Mayor William Crane, Martin Briggs, and several council members. Each name a small explosion in the crowd. Crane sat rigid in the front row, face gray. Martin Briggs looked carved from stone, hands folded tightly over his knees. Tyler sat behind them, shoulders hunched, the weight of a nation's judgment pressing down on his spine. Dr. Torres began the presentation. Screens flickered on the walls showing documents blown up to impossible size, email exchanges, budget transfers, code words highlighted in red. She spoke with the rhythm of an executioner reading the sentence. Community preservation meant racial exclusion. Development incentives meant targeted displacement. Safety measures meant intimidation. Each phrase struck like a hammer. Then the videos played. Luke Bennett's footage first. The diner, the slap, the stunned silence. Gasps rippled across the hall, though everyone had seen it before. But this time it wasn't viral entertainment. It was evidence. Next came the internal audio files recovered by Marcus Reed, each voice unmistakable. Martin Briggs bragging about property deals. Mayor Crane promising to keep the town pure. The crowd shifted, whispers swelling into disbelief. Rosa Delgado was called next. She walked to the microphone, knees trembling but voice steady. "For months I watched it get worse. I told myself to stay quiet because I needed the job, but silence was part of the problem. The morning Mr. Coleman was hit, I realized that fear is just another form of permission." Applause broke out from one side of the room. Others sat rigid, refusing to clap. Chief Ben Alvarez followed. His broad frame filled the stand, voice rough with remorse. "I saw things I didn't report. Thought I was keeping peace. I wasn't. I was protecting bullies." He looked directly at Tyler Briggs. "That stops today." Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, took the stand last among the witnesses. Her hands shook as she set down a small recorder. "My husband told me these conversations were harmless. Tradition," he said. "I started recording them because tradition shouldn't sound like hate." And the playback filled the room. Crane's voice joking about discouraging the wrong demographics, laughter following like static. When the clip ended, even his old supporters stared at the floor. Henry Coleman rose slowly when his name was called. The murmuring stilled. He walked to the podium with deliberate calm, cardigan buttoned, flag pin glinting beneath the stage lights. He didn't need a script. "I didn't come here to ruin a town," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I came here because decency only matters when it's tested. A man hit me because he thought I was nobody. But this isn't about one slap. It's about the moment everyone watched and chose silence." The hall was silent except for the hum of cameras. "I forgive the man who hit me," Henry continued. "But forgiveness isn't the end. It's a beginning. It means admitting what was done and changing so it can't happen again." Tyler Briggs stared at the floor, jaw tight. His lawyer whispered frantically, but Tyler stood anyway. His voice cracked. "I was angry at the world. I thought strength was about control. I was wrong. I can't take it back. but I can face it." Torres handed Agent Reeves a final sheet of paper. She stepped to the microphone. "New evidence was delivered this morning. An email written by Mr. Briggs to the mayor and others 3 days before the assault." She read it aloud. Phase 1 successful. 3 minority businesses closed this quarter. Property values stable. Time to make an example if resistance continues. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, curses, someone shouting from the back. Mayor Crane sank into his chair, face drained of color. Martin Briggs whispered something to his lawyer that sounded like prayer or profanity. Reeves called for order, but the truth had already detonated. For decades, Millbrook's sins had hidden behind polite smiles and church bake sales. Now, the masks were gone. When calm returned, Dr. Torres addressed the crowd. "Justice isn't punishment alone, it's reconstruction. The law will handle the criminals. The community must rebuild itself." She outlined the federal consent decree, resignations, restitution funds, oversight boards, mandatory civil rights training for every public employee. Votes were cast under supervision. 347 in favor, 89 against. The result projected on a large screen. Accountability measures approved. Henry exhaled slowly. The hall erupted, half applause, half tears. Rosa hugged him. Luke filmed from the aisle, capturing the image that would close his documentary. The old veteran standing tall amid chaos, a quiet lighthouse in a storm of reckoning. Outside, evening light poured through retreating clouds, washing the town in gold. Reporters swarmed for quotes, microphones glinting like bayonets. Mayor Crane left through a side door flanked by deputies, his resignation letter already typed. Martin Briggs followed, face blank, the empire of arrogance collapsing around him. Tyler stayed behind. He approached Henry carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. Henry studied him a long moment. "Then maybe you're ready to earn it." As darkness settled, the federal team packed up equipment. Agent Reeves stood by the doorway watching the townspeople gather outside, some embracing, some arguing. "Truth never feels clean," she said to Torres. "It just feels necessary." Torres nodded. Necessary is enough. Later that night, the main street filled with candles. Church bells rang softly. Rosa streamed it live, her voice trembling as she narrated. "Tonight, Millbrook faces itself. Maybe tomorrow it can start healing." Henry watched from his porch, the glow of hundreds of candles flickering through the trees. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but of facing. He whispered to the air, to those who had stood silent, to those who had spoken. Dignity isn't given, it's lived. Somewhere downtown, Tyler began cleaning graffiti from the diner's wall, silent under the hum of streetlights. In a few hours, dawn would rise again, this time on a town that could no longer pretend ignorance. Millbrook's reckoning was over, but its transformation had just begun. 3 months passed, and Millbrook no longer looked like the same town. The courthouse lawn was freshly cut, but the old plaques had been replaced by new ones that read "Community for All." The diner's neon sign had been repaired, each letter glowing evenly again. The smell of coffee and toast returned, but the silence that had once followed Henry Coleman wherever he went had changed. People nodded to him now. Some smiled. Others couldn't meet his eyes, but at least they tried. Federal oversight teams still visited every few weeks. Clipboards, badges, calm professionalism. Their presence didn't frighten anyone anymore. It reassured them that the changes weren't temporary. The Civil Rights Consent Decree was signed, sealed, and alive in daily routines. New training at the police department, diversity workshops at City Hall, equal opportunity loans at the local bank. When Mayor William Crane resigned, the election that followed was unlike anything Millbrook had ever seen. For the first time, young voters lined up down the block. Posters fluttered on lampposts with slogans about honesty and belonging. Rosa Delgado didn't plan to run, but the petition spread faster than she could stop it. She tried to say no. People begged her to say yes. She finally agreed, promising only one thing: to keep Millbrook honest. On election night, the community center overflowed again. The same hall where anger had once burned now smelled of coffee and anticipation. Henry stood quietly near the back, cardigan pressed, flag pin polished. When the numbers came in, landslide victory, Rosa's tears fell fast. Chief Ben Alvarez lifted her hand high for the cameras. Luke Bennett streamed the moment live, narrating that Millbrook had voted not just for leadership, but for memory, for the promise that justice could outlast outrage. Tyler Briggs watched the coverage from his apartment. The court had sentenced him to community service and mandatory counseling. His father, Martin Briggs, was under federal indictment for fraud and civil rights violations. The family company had collapsed. Tyler spent his days repainting public buildings, repairing sidewalks, listening to people who no longer looked at him with fear, but with a kind of weary pity. Some spat words. Some ignored him. He didn't fight back. For the first time, he worked quietly. Mayor Delgado, people were still getting used to the title, spent her mornings in the office and her afternoons at Murphy's Diner, apron back on, serving coffee to remind herself why she'd started speaking in the first place. She created the Millbrook Unity Fund, starting with a grant of $500,000 from federal settlements and private donations. That money went to rebuild minority-owned businesses and support veterans. Luke Bennett's documentary, The Diner Incident, premiered at his college theater before reaching millions online. His voiceover told the story in clean, calm sentences. It began with a slap, but it ended with a mirror. What Millbrook saw wasn't a monster. It was itself. The documentary won a state journalism award and drew national attention. Networks offered him contracts. He refused the first few, choosing to finish a follow-up called Small Towns, Big Change. Dr. Alicia Torres returned to Washington to testify before Congress. Her report on systemic discrimination in rural America cited the Millbrook case as the new standard for accountability. New bills were drafted to expand federal oversight on civil rights compliance in small municipalities. Agent Dana Reeves was reassigned to coordinate a regional task force. Her quiet efficiency had made her indispensable. Before leaving town, she stopped by Henry's house. He was pruning his small rose garden, hands steady despite the summer heat. She thanked him for his patience, for his courage. He smiled. "You and your team did the work," he said. She shook her head. "We just followed the light you held." Across the street, children played again where reporters once swarmed. Their laughter was a kind of healing no press conference could stage. Veterans groups painted murals downtown, flags intertwined with clasped hands, the words "Dignity is Action" arched in bright colors. The diner reopened officially under new management. The owners framed a still image from Luke's footage on the wall. Henry, standing straight, blood on his cheek, calm in his eyes. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "Never mistake silence for weakness." Every Tuesday, Henry still came in at 7:30 sharp. He still ordered black coffee and wheat toast, still counted exact change, though the staff never charged him any more. Rosa would smile, refill his cup, and say she'd argue with him later about it. He'd just nod, content with the ritual. Sometimes tourists visited, curious to see the place where it happened. They whispered, took photos. Henry never minded. Let them look, he'd think. Maybe they'll learn something. Chief Alvarez, now police chief, stopped by the diner often. He wore no arrogance in the new uniform, only humility. He told new recruits the same story every orientation. The law means nothing if you use it to stay comfortable. The job is to protect the person least likely to be protected. The weeks rolled into months. Reporters moved on, the cameras vanished, but the changes stayed visible. The town library hosted civil rights exhibits. The local high school created scholarships in Henry Coleman's name for students showing courage and leadership. Ethan Coleman visited once, unannounced, his government SUV discreetly parked 2 streets over. Father and son walked the edge of the park, quiet conversation carrying between them. Ethan told his father that 23 investigations had been launched nationwide, all inspired by Millbrook. Henry smiled softly. One spark, son. That's all it ever takes. Tyler Briggs began showing up at community service events without a court order. He helped paint the murals, planted trees near the Veterans Memorial, spoke quietly to teenagers about anger, about pride, about where it leads. Some accepted him, some didn't. Redemption, he learned, was not applause. It was the willingness to keep showing up when no one clapped. The summer festival returned for the first time in years. Banners stretched across Main Street. Rosa gave the opening speech on a makeshift stage decorated with red, white, and blue ribbons. Her voice carried through the crowd. Millbrook is not perfect, but we've proven that facing truth is not ruin, it's rebirth. The applause was long and full of relief. Henry sat near the back, hat in his lap, watching children run with small flags. He felt something ease inside him, like an old wound that had finally stopped aching. When night fell, fireworks cracked above the rooftops, reflected in shop windows and puddles left from an afternoon rain. The crowd cheered. Henry looked up at the bursts of color and thought of the men he'd served with, of the long, quiet years after, of the slap that had reminded him what freedom really meant. Dignity, he realized, was not about pride. It was about restraint, the courage to answer hate with patience, to stand still so the world could see itself clearly. Months later, an envelope arrived from Washington. Inside was a small medal, not military but civic, engraved simply, for exemplary courage in the pursuit of justice. He placed it beside his Purple Heart, neither above nor below, just equal. One crisp autumn morning, as he locked his front door for his usual Tuesday walk to the diner, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was calm, professional. Mr. Coleman, this is Detective Angela Foster from Riverside County. We're investigating a similar incident involving another veteran. We could use your insight. Henry paused, the morning light catching the silver in his hair. He glanced at the flag on his porch fluttering in a cool breeze. His lips curved into a quiet smile. Some fights are worth fighting twice, Detective. When do you need me? He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward Murphy's Diner, the sound of his steady steps blending with the hum of a town finally awake. Inside, the new waitress greeted him like family. Morning, Mr. Coleman. The usual. He nodded. Black coffee, wheat toast, a table by the window. Same as always, but the air was lighter now. Rosa came in from the kitchen, balancing two plates, waving him over to join a table of veterans who'd gathered to meet the man behind the story. Henry sat down among them, the chatter warm, the clink of silverware gentle, the sound of a community in repair. He glanced out the window toward the horizon, where the first rays of morning lit the rooftops in gold. Beyond those rooftops, there would always be another town, another diner, another moment when dignity would be tested. But for now, in this small corner of America, the test had been passed. The world would remember Millbrook not for its shame, but for how it changed. Luke Bennett's final documentary sequence captured that image. The flag outside Henry's house, caught in sunlight, rustling softly. His voice narrated over it with simple words. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear cardigans and count quarters for coffee. Sometimes they remind the rest of us that silence is the enemy of freedom. And the screen faded to black. A final line appeared. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for Part 2, The Riverside Investigation. The numbers rolled in, 12.7 million views, $847,000 raised for civil rights funds, 23 investigations launched nationwide. But those numbers didn't matter to Henry Coleman. To him, the only number that ever mattered was one. One moment of courage, one person who refused to stay silent. And sometimes that was all it took to wake a nation.